This is an excellent time to be reading about the reason Jefferson founded the university and his ideas and vision. And it's a time when, once again, we're debating the role of universities, especially with more than 40% of the population going to university. Is this the best way to train people? What should universities actually be teaching? And I also think it's important to be reminded of Jefferson's ideas, because he believed very strongly in state education. And as we are living in a time when the cost of education is becoming prohibitive to a large part of the population, and we remember that the basic philosophy of the nation is that people should, as much as possible, have equal opportunity and the chance to improve themselves and their lives. And it's questionable whether that can be possible if a large segment of the population are essentially denied a university education. And even the states now, individual state universities, are hugely increasing their fees as legislatures less and less want to fund education. And it's interesting to ask why they don't fund education, why it's become less popular, when their forefathers in the 50s and 60s, when America was actually not as wealthy as it is today, were willing nevertheless to make that sacrifice. It's fascinating in terms of Jefferson, because Jefferson was anti-government and is always cited as anti-government, and yet Jefferson was proposing a huge increase, not so much in central government power, but in state government power, into the social welfare of people, which government usually didn't involve itself with. And in fact, many of his opponents argued this is best left to the private sector. And he acknowledged that the private sector had a role to play, and it was good to have private institutions, but he said that, there had to be a state system, and he was very concerned about educational standards generally in the state.
When do you expect to have your book completed?
So I expect to finish the book this year, and it should be out sometime next year. The University of Virginia Press is doing it. They want it out while we continue to celebrate the bicentenary of the university. They've fortunately agreed to do color illustrations, which pleases me a lot. I've always felt the visual is very important, and that it helps to break up text and to entertain the reader. I suppose I'm particularly pleased that I found a lot of very good original source material in order that I can describe particular scenes, like students dining with Jefferson at Monticello and describing at the first anniversary of the first class 50 years later how he'd push his chair back during the dinner because he was slightly deaf, and particularly in groups of people. And he didn't want to impair their conversation, because what he wanted to see was genuine conversation and discussion, and the sense that he was passing on the baton to another generation that would contain leaders like himself. I mentioned that I found a lot more material about the original founding of the university. We can describe what it was like for the first professors when they arrived at the university, describe Jefferson's editing of the Bible, which I do in more detail than is generally available anywhere else, as a lead-in to his religious thinking and the arrangements, the unique arrangements that he made for the university.
Being the case of your preference or inclination for illustrations and visual artifacts, I hope you don't mind that I follow you through this process until the publication of the book, and we continue these conversations on film.
I am really very grateful to you for doing this, and it delights me that you're interested in pursuing this. I do think there's a lot of good material, I want it, and I'm writing it not just for the alumni and students of the university. My intention is really to make this a book of interest. I think it's also, it tells you a lot about Jefferson as a person. People struggle to feel that they know Jefferson and that they can ever know Jefferson. But when you follow him through a project that he was obsessed by, to the point that his grandchildren later complained that they felt a bit neglected because all of these students coming up to dine and professors, not to mention lots of interested members of the public who just turned up at Monticello as if it was already a tourist site. And this was his abiding obsession. And he said, I'm ready to depart this life once I see this university open, which is basically what happened. He did get to wine and dine the Marquis de Lafayette, who was one of the few surviving heroes of the American Revolution, and they dined in the unfinished rotunda. The rotunda was the only building that was still not fully complete when he died, but that was his passion, the architecture, and of course his conception of an academical village, a university as a community of scholars and a place where conversations take place, and deliberately locating the professors between the dorms of the students, because he imagined that it would be like his own education at William and Mary, where he personally knew his professors, went out to dinner with them, became part of their intellectual groups, and he wanted every student to have that kind of experience.